National Educational Television presents African Writers of Today, a series of programs surveying the literary scene in contemporary Africa. Today we feature an interview with the Nigerian novelist Chinua Achebe. Mr. Achebe is author of the novels Things Fall Apart and No Longer at Ease. His third novel, Arrow of God, is soon to be published. Chinua Achebe will be interviewed by two fellow African writers, Mr. Wole Soyinka, Nigerian poet and dramatist, and program host Louis Nkosi, South African author, journalist, and broadcaster. This program was recorded in the Nigerian National Museum, Lagos.
Now, these little horned things are very interesting. Every adult Igbo man had one, and when he died, it split into two, and one half is buried with him, and the other half is thrown away. It's called Ikenga.
Oh, yes, this is the cult of strength,
That's
of
right.
Sort of virility.
That's right.
Manhood.
That's right.
Yes.
Well, gentlemen, maybe we can sit down now and start with the interview.
Okay.
Are you all comfortable?
Yes, thank you.
Here at the Museum of Nigeria in Lagos, we are sitting with Chinua Achebe, a man possessed of a startlingly original talent in writing. Chinua Achebe the Young has given the world two novels, Things Fall Apart, No Longer at Ease, and all critics seem to agree that Chinua Achebe combines a simplicity in technique and a very complex technical talent indeed. But maybe Wole Soyinka would like to add a few words of introduction.
No, I don't think I have much more to add to what you said about Chinua Achebe on the personal level and all the other aspects. I'd just like to go straight into your work. And I'd like to take as my point of reference, for a start, this last carving you showed me, the carving of the Ikenga. Now this represents, as you said, the spirit of manhood, of strength, of real masculine energy in Igbo society. Now, in Things Fall Apart, Okonkwo seems to me to represent the kind of figure in society who is acted upon from within by this kind of strong spiritual quality. Now, I'd like to know from you whether this is a conscious derivative in the creation of this character, or whether, you know, just the sense of the character in society, his religion, his beliefs.
Well, not consciously, but Okonkwo, as you said, symbolizes, if you like, strength and aggressiveness. Now, these are some of the qualities that his people admire, you see. And I wanted a character who could be called representative of this particular group of people. And you know, they admired a man of strength, a man of wealth, a man who had a big compound with wives and had many farms, that sort of thing.
Yes. Now, this is a dangerous question, I know, but does it imply anything in your own personal attitude towards this society, which places so much premium on what, after all, may be a kind of the exhibitionist side of, you know, the masculine ego? Does it imply something of your own attitude, the fact that Okonkwo does, by this very personal immersion in this, you know, in this kind of value, that he heads for a fall?
Yes. I think there is a point there. There is the weakness of this particular society, I think, is lack of adaptation, you see, not being able to bend. Of course, I can't say that this now represents the Igbo people today, but I think in his time, the strong men were those who did not bend, and I think this was a fault in the culture itself.
Yes, Chinua, I'm more interested in what some people have described as your deliberate attempt to avoid passing moral judgment on your characters. For instance, in the first novel that you wrote called Things Fall Apart, there is this absolute cruelty in which, because the tribal society sanctions the killing of a ward by his protector, that this man carries this out. Although he seems to have some kind of doubts, he doesn't avoid doing so. And the way you wrote that passage seemed to imply that you were not able to make any particular judgment on that action. Is this true, or what?
No, I don't think this is a fair assessment at all. You have to see the story as a whole. This is what I was saying to Wole earlier on, that this particular society perhaps believed too much in manliness, you see. And this is part of it, and perhaps this is part of the reason why it crashed at the end, you see. And I don't think a writer should point a moral lesson on every page. I think the total effect at the end of the story is that this is the way that things went, you see. I like my moral to be, not to be as obvious as
yes, what I was getting at was whether you had some kind of moral point of view.
Yes, well, yes.
Taking the book as a whole.
Yes, I did. You see, I think that this particular society had its good side, the poetry of the life, the simplicity, if you like, the communal way of sharing in happiness and in sorrow and in work and all that. You see, it had all that. Also, it had art and beauty, but it had this cruel side to it. You see, and it is this that I think that helped to bring down my hero.
Well, for a moment I was going to, when you began explaining, when you began sort of expatiating on the values of this society, I was going to say that this sounded dangerously like the philosophy of negritude. Shall I say almost the myth of negritude, simple, but I was relieved you mentioned an extra dimension to it. But if I may pick up something which Liz was saying, the whole question of style, do you accept the evaluation which has been placed on your style by some critics that there is a kind of almost precise workmanship about it, that it's almost a kind of unrelieved competence as opposed to genuine artistic inspiration, hit me if you like, but how do you react to this kind? How do you react to this sort of?
Don't expect me to accept that, but no. As a matter of fact, I don't think one could call my method, describe my method in those terms, because I don't particularly spend a lot of time on polishing. As a matter of fact, Things Fall Apart was written straight, without any kind of draft. So I wouldn't say that, yes, no.
Yes. If I may be permitted to ask you another question, Chinua. As a South African, I'm very much conscious of the fact that there seems to be some kind of continuity between the modern day society in Nigeria, from which I suppose you spring, and the old traditional society. What were the formative influences upon your life? How were you able to draw such an accurate picture of the old traditional society? How are these influences passed on?
Yes, well, I think I belong to a very fortunate generation in this respect, that the old hadn't been completely disorganized. You see, when I was growing up, I think the disorganization has gone a stage further now. But when I was growing up, it was easy, especially if you lived in a village, to see, if not in whole, at least in part, you see, these old ways of life, you see. I was particularly interested in listening to the way old people talked, you see, and this is the kind of background, you see. And the festivals, of course, were still observed, maybe not in the same force, but they were still there.
So this didn't really entail a deliberate kind of research of the adult artist into this life.
No.
Something you had.
No, I didn't do any research at all.
Chinua, when you were going to the University College of Ibadan and you switched off from a course in medicine to literature, did you find any precursors in the West African novel, English people have written a novel about your society, which you could use as a model, or did you find nothing at all that was useful to you?
Well, actually, there wasn't very much when I was at college. Joyce Carey had written some of his books. If I may say so, perhaps he helped to inspire me, but not in the usual way. I was really angry with his book, Mr. Johnson, which was set in Nigeria. See, I happened to read this, I think, in my second year. And I said to myself, now this is absurd. And if somebody without knowledge, without any inside knowledge of the people he's trying to describe, can get away with it, perhaps I have to try my hand at it.
Well, you mentioned Mr. Johnson. There was, this is the second book now, No Longer at Ease. The hero of that book, he struck me as, in some way, rather effete kind of character. You do not see any kind of equation at all between his particular weaknesses. I refer especially to his kind of relationship with his European boss. You do not see any similarity at all between this and Mr. Johnson.
No, I don't. Because I think to me, Mr. Johnson doesn't live at all. I mean, he's a caricature.
Yeah, precisely. I know Mr. Johnson is a caricature.
Yes.
But then caricature really is something you exaggerate. You do exaggerate some kind of positive, factual elements. Now, you do not think that this hero, he does demonstrate some of these exaggerated qualities in Mr. Johnson. Again, I go back to his relationship with his boss in the office, the kind of peculiar deference which he had towards him, this kind of tolerance of this boss, which is, exaggerated many more. Do you?
Yes, well, I don't think, you see, if you go back to that book, you'll see that he actually didn't have much respect for his boss, but his nature was such that he was able to dismiss him as an example of this or that, you see. There was, in fact, a passage where he was thinking of the Greens. This is his boss. Yeah. The Greens of this generation, you see, they are tragedy. No, I think his problem was that he was perhaps too civilized, to shout. And this might be what you're referring to. But I don't think it's the same thing as Mr. Johnson. Perhaps even a caricature is not a correct way. Perhaps it's simply a puppet.
A complete travesty of the situation.
Chinua, Professor Abrahams, in his book, The Mind of Africa, selects you as one of the most original or the more African of all the African novelists that he has read in English-speaking Africa. I was just wondering whether you found that there was something to be done with this alien form, as I suspect the novel is, whether you found that you could experiment with the form, not just with the content. Is there room to turn around in this alien form at all?
Yes, well, I think the novel form suits me extremely well just now. I haven't read Dr. Abraham's book, but I think I can regard myself, with justice as very much an African writer. I think I'm basically an ancestor worshipper, if you like. Not in the same sense as my grandfather would probably do it, pouring out palm wine on the floor. for the ancestors. But you know, with me, it takes the form of celebration, and I feel a certain compulsion to do this. It's not because I think this would appeal to listeners, to my readers. I feel that this is something that has to be done before I move on to the contemporary scene. And in fact, the reason why my third book goes back again to the past, not as remote as the first, is that I have come to think that my first book is no longer adequate. I've learned a lot more about this particular people, you know, my ancestors.
But sorry to move to a more general topic. Do you agree with what Lewis said about the novel being an alien form? I have in mind when I say this the kind of idiom of storytelling which is very prevalent in the East, even much more than the West, whereby a story can be recited with action, with demonstration, with dances, with you know, with all the with makeup for days, night after night. Now, I mean, isn't this really a difference of material? One is oral and the other.
That you are writing now. Yes, and well, I agree with you. I don't think the art of the story is the same, really. I mean, it's not any more alien than telling the story, as you say, but it's a question of writing it down and
using a different language also.
Yes, well, I don't want to make too tight a distinction between the storytelling tradition in Africa and the European forms of novel. But I do feel that the European novel has a certain background, a bourgeois background, and the individual authorship is another prominent feature of it. And of course the fact that it can be enjoyed by a single person by himself without sort of being gathered together with lots of other people. But no matter, I want to pass on to another question I would like to put to you, and it's a more sociological question. I'm interested in just how much social power a novelist in Nigeria has, how much influence he has with his society, or is the society completely indifferent to him?
Well, the novel is comparatively young here. It's only about 10 years old, and it would be impossible to say precisely what kind of influence we are going to have. All I can say is that it is growing. I think my books, for instance, have done extremely well in Nigeria and in other parts of Africa, and I think the same goes with the other novelists here. Whether you can call this social influence, I think probably we ought to wait some years to see.
Yes, but I'm interested because there has already been a definite reaction from, say, the federal government of Nigeria to Cyprian Ekwense's novel, which was about being filmed, and they banned this. And they said it shouldn't be done because it doesn't accurately reflect the life of Nigeria. Are the politicians beginning to react to some kind of social criticism contained in the younger literature of Nigeria?
Well, I can only quote from my own experiences, and I haven't come up against any obstruction like the example you've given. Maybe I have not. Maybe when I move into the present in a sort of write a political novel, that would be the time to test. But all I can say is that I haven't yet come up against any kind of opposition.
And in any case, I think politicians behave pretty much the same all over the world. The basic suspicions, even Cyprian Ekwense's book, which you refer to, for instance, is not really a piece of social criticism. I think it's just this problem of politicians getting nervous about a false image being presented without ever understanding the whole business of creative writing, and cannot understand that if a prostitute is written about in the book, it isn't a kind of treatise on sociology. But I would like to make an abrupt transition here. I know you were in the States very recently, and I'd like to know if you met any of the American novelists, particularly the Negro novelists and writers. Maybe there's something you'd like to say.
Yes, I did indeed. In fact, that was the very purpose of my visit. I did meet with the Harlem group of writers, Langston Hughes and John Killens and a whole lot of younger ones. I didn't meet Baldwin, unfortunately, because he was tied up with other duties.
Yeah.
I also met quite a few white writers, not just novelists. I met Arthur Miller, the dramatist. But perhaps what I got most was a kind of a closer relationship with the literary pulse in America, you see. I think I'm now a lot more interested in what is being written there than I was before.
Did you notice any similarity or problems? For instance, I would like to know if you felt that they were particularly, the Negro writers were particularly interested in your work because of this interest of yours and your orientation around the traditional African way of life and philosophies. Did you?
Yes, very much so. In fact, I remember now one Negro writer who autographed a book of hers with the words, something to this effect, to Achebe, who depicted so beautifully the culture that might have been mine. This is the kind of feeling I think they have.
Chinua, the European critics, if I may say, have been most kind to your novels, at least in their appreciation and acceptance of them. But you have been the most vicious critic of the European critics. Why is this so? What do you find so objectionable in their approach to African literature?
Well, I'm surprised to hear you say that I'm the most vicious critic of the critics. No, I don't object to critics at all. What I do object to is people preaching from a position of ignorance. And this you find quite a lot in the criticisms that are made of our work. Even, as I said before, even when they are praising you, you find that this is not really for the right reasons at all. Of course, I'm not saying that they should shut up, but see, I hate any kind of cultural or literary popes, you see, being set up. People who can pontificate on the real African literature, or the real this, you see, and then you find a lot about words like real or true or valid, you see, and these things, yes, and these words I think are almost meaningless in the context.
How do you react to the critic who lumped you, Cyprian Ekwensi and Honora Nzeku together as an unbeatable treble choice in a your novel? How do you react personally to this as a writer?
Well, that particular critic, I think I know who you mean. I don't care particularly for him. Of course, he's welcome to his opinion about being unbeatable. I mean, I couldn't quarrel with that. But I don't care for him as a critic.
Yeah, but if I may just pursue this a bit further, he also makes a statement on which I think you might like to comment. Talking, I think, about, I forgot whose book now, he says, and he also writes the kind of books which his readers, his people like to read. A novel with a moral at the end. Now, you talked earlier about one of your novels possessing some kind of moral, but do you make a distinction between the way he used this?
Yes, I'm sure what it means is the kind of moral which you have in stories for children, you see, and the moral of this story is that the man who behaves this way has this kind of reward. I mean, that obviously is not the right approach, you see, for a novelist.
Chinua, you have said something about the latest novel you have written having progressed beyond the two books that you worked on the first time. Could you indicate perhaps in what direction you think you've made this advance, technically or otherwise?
Well, it would be difficult to describe the technical superiorities. I don't know.
Is there a difference in subject matter?
Yes, there is definitely. handling a whole lot of more complex themes, you see, like the relationship between a god and his priest, you see. My chief character in this novel is a village priest, not a Christian priest, you see, in the traditional African religion. And I'm interested in this whole question of who decides what shall be the wish of the god, you see, and that kind of situation. And I've also tried to develop my treatment of character. Whether I succeed or not, still to be seen, you see, but I think that I have progressed in that direction.
Yes, and the other question, of course, is the more general one, which bothers a lot of people, and it has to do with the audience. Do you find that you're beginning to develop an indigenous audience in Nigeria so that you can rely less on metropolitan audiences, or to put it in another form, so that you can become less conscious of the demands of European audiences?
Yes, I think you're right. Although I must say that I don't think I was consciously working with an audience in mind in my first book. In fact, I remember being surprised when the first person who read it said, "Who did you have in mind?" You see. Now, that doesn't mean I didn't have somebody in mind, but I wasn't thinking of it primarily. The second time, of course, this thought having been put into my mind, I found myself thinking about it. But now I feel I don't have to worry over much about who understands what I'm saying or who doesn't. I think that there will always be enough people interested in a good story.
Well, perhaps this is just as good a time to stop this, gentlemen. We're greatly privileged to have met Chinua Achebe at the Museum of Nigeria, surrounded as we are by the masks and the brooding spirit, which is about the same kind of thing that broods in the novels by Chinua Achebe. The past is very much there. Chinua Achebe, all critics agree, has great promise and promises to give us some of the best things that have been produced in African literature.
You have just seen and heard another broadcast in the series African Writers of Today. This series is devoted to the literary scene in contemporary Africa. The personality on today's program, Chinua Achebe, Nigerian novelist, author of Things Fall Apart, No Longer at Ease. His third novel, Arrow of God, is soon to be published. Chinua Achebe was interviewed by Wole Soyinka, Nigerian poet and dramatist, and series host Louis Nkosi, South African author, journalist, and broadcaster.